She was 21 and sleeping inside the back seat of a faded blue hatchback parked behind a closed gas station at the edge of a quiet mountain town. Every night, cold wind slipped through the cracked rubber around the windows and carried the smell of rain pine trees and gasoline into the tiny space where she slept beneath an old gray blanket. Her name was Elena Harper, and everything she owned fit inside 2 canvas bags stacked beside her feet, 3 sweaters, a pair of worn jeans, an old photograph of her grandfather holding a guitar, and $34 in cash. That was all she had left after her mother's new husband told her she was old enough to survive on her own. The words still echoed in her head at night. Not yelled, not emotional, just cold, like someone locking a door forever. For 3 weeks, Elena drove from town to town looking for work. Anything. Waitress, cleaner, cashier. But every place either wasn't hiring or wanted experience she didn't have. Then one rainy afternoon, she saw a crooked wooden sign hanging outside an abandoned building near the highway. Workshop sale, everything must go. The building looked half-rotten. Broken windows, collapsed fence, a faded painted guitar hanging above the entrance. Inside, an old man sat behind a folding table drinking coffee from a chipped mug. $10, he said quietly, for the whole workshop. Elena thought he was joking, but he wasn't. And because she had nowhere else to go, she bought it. A forgotten Luthier's workshop, hidden deep in the mountains, for $10 cash. But what she didn't know was, the final guitar case locked inside the workshop had been untouched for over 30 years. And something inside it was waiting for her. Something no one had found. Something someone had hidden on purpose. That night, as rain hit the roof above her sleeping bag, Elena heard a strange sound coming from somewhere beneath the workshop floor. A slow wooden knock. 3 times. Then silence. Before we continue, if stories like this make you slow down and feel something real, take a second to subscribe. And if you've ever gone through a moment where life completely closed the door on you, leave a comment below. Sometimes strangers understand each other more than family ever did. Elena's grandfather used to repair guitars in a tiny shed behind his farmhouse. His name was Walter Harper. Most people in town barely notice him. Quiet men usually disappear that way. But to Elena, he seemed larger than the world itself. When she was 7 years old, she would sit on an upside-down milk crate in the corner of his workshop, while rain tapped softly against the tin roof overhead. The room always smelled the same. Sawdust, old cedar wood, coffee, machine oil, and lemon polish. Walter's hands moved slowly when he worked, never rushed. He used to tell her something she didn't fully understand back then. Broken things talk, he would whisper, while sanding guitar neck smooth. Most people just don't stay quiet long enough to hear them. Elena remembered watching thin curls would fall onto the floor as sunlight slipped through dusty windows. Walter repaired instruments nobody else cared about anymore. Cracked violins, old banjos, forgotten guitars with snapped strings. People would bring him ruined instruments, and somehow they always left sounding alive again. But Walter never made much money. Her grandmother June worked double shifts at a diner 30 miles away just to keep the farm running. At night, Elena would hear them talking softly in the kitchen after they thought she was asleep. Bills, repairs, debt, winter fuel, always money problems. Still, her grandfather never stopped repairing instruments. Some work feeds your stomach, he once told her. Some work feeds your soul. When Elena was 13, Walter became sick. The doctor said his lungs were failing from decades of breathing sawdust and chemical fumes. He stopped working after that. The workshop slowly fell silent, and silence changed everything. Her grandmother passed away the next winter. Walter followed less than a year later. After that, Elena's mother sold the farmhouse, sold the tools, sold nearly everything, except one old photograph Elena secretly kept hidden inside her backpack. A picture of Walter smiling beside a handmade acoustic guitar. On the back, written in faded ink, were 5 words. Good would remembers every hand. At 19, Elena left school to help pay household bills. At 21, her mother remarried. 3 months later, Elena was gone. Just like that. No screaming. No dramatic goodbye. One suitcase placed beside the front door. Her stepfather avoided eye contact. Her mother cried quietly but said nothing. That hurt more, because silence can sometimes feel like permission. After leaving home, Elena spent weeks drifting through small towns across the mountains. Some nights, she slept in parking lots. Some nights beside rivers. Once behind a church. She learned little survival habits quickly. How to wash her face in gas station bathrooms without attracting attention. How to stretch one sandwich across 2 days. How to sleep lightly. Always lightly. But the hardest part wasn't hunger. It was invisibility. People stopped looking directly at her after a while, like poverty itself made others uncomfortable. One evening during a storm, Elena parked near a roadside diner and watched families through the glowing windows. Steam rose from coffee mugs. People laughed. Forks clinked softly against plates. Warm light, warm food, warm lives. And for the first time since leaving home, she cried, not loudly, just silently into the steering wheel while rain covered the sound. That same night, she took the photograph of her grandfather from her bag. Walter stood beside that guitar with sawdust on his shirt and a soft smile on his face. She stared at the words again. Goodwood remembers every hand. Something about that sentence stayed with her. As if her grandfather had left behind more than a memory. As if he had tried to tell her something before he died. She just didn't understand it yet. The workshop sat nearly 2 hours from the nearest town, deep in the mountains, hidden beside an old logging road swallowed by weeds and fog. Elena almost turned around 3 different times driving there. The tires slipped on wet gravel. Fog covered the road so heavily she could barely see ahead. By the time she arrived, evening shadows stretched through the trees like dark water. The building looked worse than she remembered. The wooden walls leaned slightly sideways. One window was boarded shut. Rust covered the metal roof. And hanging above the entrance was that faded guitar sign, swaying softly in the wind. The old man who sold it to her was gone. No note, no explanation, just an envelope taped to the inside door. Inside was a single brass key, and one sentence. Some things deserve to stay hidden until the right hands find them. Elena stood there for a long time reading those words. The workshop smelled abandoned. Dust, wet wood, mold, old varnish. But beneath all of that, there was another smell. Faint, sweet, like cedar wood warmed by sunlight. And somehow, it reminded her of her grandfather. The first few days were miserable. Rain leaked through the roof. The electricity barely worked. Mice scratched inside the walls at night. Elena slept inside a corner office wrapped in 2 sweaters beside a tiny portable heater she found buried under old newspapers. But slowly, she began cleaning, sweeping dust, organizing tools, opening windows. And the deeper she cleaned, the stranger the workshop became. Some drawers were completely empty. Others were filled with perfectly organized guitar strings, sorted by year. One cabinet held dozens of handwritten repair notes dating back 40 years. Names, measurements, tiny sketches. The handwriting changed halfway through the journals. One neat and careful. The other rushed and nervous. As if 2 different people had worked there. Then Elena noticed something strange. Every evening around the same time, the workshop made noises. Not normal, settling noises. Specific sounds. A soft knock beneath the floorboards. Sometimes 2 knocks. Sometimes 3. Always near the back repair room. The room nobody seemed to use. At first she blamed pipes. Or old wood shifting in the cold. But the sounds kept happening. And always after sunset. One night, Elena followed the sound, holding a flashlight. The beam moved across dusty shelves lined with unfinished guitars. Cobwebs stretched between clamps hanging from the walls. And near the back corner, she found something odd. A square section of floor slightly darker than the rest. Different wood, different nails. As if someone had replaced it years ago. Her stomach tightened. She pressed her foot against it gently. Hollow, very hollow. But before she could investigate further, the lights suddenly died. Complete darkness swallowed the room. Then came another sound. Not beneath the floor this time. Inside the wall. A soft scraping noise. Elena froze. The workshop became painfully silent afterward, only rain tapping outside. She barely slept that night. The next morning, she almost left. Seriously, she packed half her things into the car. But before driving away, she looked back at the workshop window glowing in early morning fog. And suddenly she remembered her grandfather sanding guitars in silence. Broken things talk. Most people just don't stay quiet long enough to hear them. So she stayed. Days passed. Then another strange thing happened. While clearing shelves in the storage room, Elena found dozens of old guitar cases stacked against the wall. Most were empty, dust-covered, forgotten, except one. A black leather case hidden behind the others. Locked shut. No label. No dust. It looked newer than everything else, as if someone had touched it recently. Her hands trembled slightly lifting it. Heavy, much heavier than a guitar should be, but there was no key. That night the knocking beneath the floor returned. Louder now. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. Elena grabbed a hammer and flashlight. Heart pounding. She walked into the back repair room again. Rain hammered the roof above her. The hollow floor section sat quietly beneath her feet, waiting. She knelt beside it and pried carefully at the edges. The nails resisted at first. Then suddenly, crack! The wooden panel lifted. Cold air rushed upward from below. Elena aimed the flashlight inside. A narrow hidden space, barely large enough for a person to crawl through, and deep inside the darkness, she saw another guitar case, older, covered in dust, waiting beneath the workshop floor. Her breathing became shallow. The hidden space looked ancient, as if no one had opened it in decades. Elena climbed down carefully. Dust floated through the flashlight beam like smoke. The underground compartment smelled dry. Old cedar, paper, metal, time itself. The guitar case rested against the far wall beside several sealed wooden boxes. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She opened one box first. Inside were bundles of cash wrapped in yellowed newspaper. Not hundreds, thousands. Her hands shook violently. Another box contained old silver coins and jewelry wrapped in cloth. But it was a guitar case that terrified her most, because someone had protected it, hidden it, waited for it. Elena slowly opened the clasps. Inside wasn't a guitar. It was a collection of journals, letters, photographs, and beneath them, a beautifully handcrafted acoustic guitar, unlike anything she had ever seen. Smooth dark wood, tiny carved details along the edges, perfect craftsmanship. Inside the case lid was a faded photograph. 2 men standing beside this very workshop. One of them was the old man who sold her the building. The other was her grandfather. Elena stared at the picture in disbelief. Her grandfather had known this place, known these people, known everything. Then she found the letter, folded carefully beneath the guitar, addressed simply to the girl with Walter's eyes. Her hands trembled opening it. The handwriting belonged to the old man, the man who sold her the workshop. The letter explained everything. Decades earlier, Walter and the old man had built guitars together during hard winters when logging jobs disappeared. The workshop became their secret refuge. But during financial collapse years ago, corrupt land developers tried forcing families off the mountain. Money disappeared. People lost homes. Walter discovered the developers were hiding illegal cash through property deals. The old man stole part of that money before the developers destroyed everything. Not for revenge, for survival. Walter convinced him to hide it instead of spending it recklessly, to someday help someone who truly needed a second chance. The old man wrote that Walter often talked about Elena, about her patience, her kindness, her ability to listen quietly. Walter believed you would someday understand what most people never do. The letter said that valuable things are rarely loud. Elena cried, silently holding the paper, not because of the money, because somehow her grandfather had still been protecting her years after his death. And beneath the letter lay one final object, Walter's old carving knife, the same tool she remembered from childhood, wrapped carefully in cloth, waiting for her hands. Elena didn't become rich overnight. Most of the hidden money went toward legal repairs, taxes, and restoring the property properly. She almost ruined everything twice. Contractors overcharged her. A storm damaged half the roof again. Some days she sat on the workshop floor exhausted and unsure if she could continue. But little by little, the place came alive. She repaired windows herself, learned woodworking from Walter's journals, watched old repair videos late into the night using weak internet service. Her fingers blistered constantly. She made mistakes, ruined pieces of wood, cracked her first guitar neck, cried afterward from frustration. But she kept going. A retired musician named Samuel began stopping by occasionally after hearing rumors someone reopened the old workshop. At first, he only brought coffee, then advice, then old instruments needing repair. Your grandfather had patient hands, he told her one afternoon. You're starting to have them too. Months passed. The workshop slowly transformed into something warm again. Music returned. Customers returned. Light returned. And for the first time in years, Elena stopped feeling invisible. One evening, she hung her grandfather's photograph above the main workbench. Beneath it, she carved his words into the wood carefully by hand. Goodwood remembers every hand. People began visiting not just for repairs, but because the workshop felt alive. Quiet, honest, safe somehow. Travelers passing through the mountains stopped to listen, while Elena tested repaired guitars near the open windows at sunset. And every now and then, when the workshop became very still late at night, she could almost imagine hearing Walter humming softly somewhere nearby. Not haunting, not frightening, just memory, living quietly inside the walls. Sometimes the world throws people away before they've even discovered who they are. Sometimes families fail, doors close, homes disappear. But hidden beneath broken places, there can still be something waiting. Not magic, not miracles, just proof that kindness survives longer than cruelty. Walter understood something most people forget. Real value takes time. Old wood, old love, old sacrifice. None of it disappears completely. It stays hidden quietly, waiting for the right hands. And maybe that's true for people too. Maybe broken lives are not endings. Maybe they're unfinished restorations. 1 year later, Elena stood outside the workshop, watching snow fall softly across the mountains. Warm yellow light glowed through the windows behind her. Inside, repaired guitars lined the walls once again. Music drifted faintly through the cold evening air. The same girl who once cried alone behind a gas station now had a place people traveled miles to visit. Not because she became wealthy, but because she rebuilt something honest, something human. Elena reached into her coat pocket and touched the old photograph of Walter, edges worn soft now from years of carrying it. She smiled quietly, then looked up at the faded guitar sign, swaying gently above the workshop door. The wind moved through the trees, soft, patient, almost like breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, she no longer felt abandoned. She felt found. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe for more slow burn emotional mysteries like this. And in the comments below, tell us about someone who changed your life quietly. A grandparent, a teacher, a stranger. Because sometimes the people who speak the softest leave the deepest echoes behind.